Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen. Amen. Namaste.
Public business, government business, motions.
The Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to move that the following motion, standing in the name of the Minister of Finance, be it resolved that the Senate amendments to the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment and Validation Bill 2023, listed in the appendix, be now considered.
Honourable members, the question is that the Senate amendments to the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment and Validation Bill 2023, listed in the appendix, be now considered. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
Clause 3. In proposed paragraph E, delete the words "in consultation with" and replace with the words "with the agreement of." B. Delete paragraph B1 and substitute the following. 1. Deleting the words 5 and substituting the words 6E. Clause 5. In subparagraph A1, delete the words "in consultation with" and replace with the words "with the agreement of." B. After paragraph B, insert the following new paragraph. C. By inserting after subsection 3 the following new subsection. 4. Regulations made under section 63(1)(c) shall provide for the contracts awarded to be reported to the office.
The Attorney General.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to clauses 3 and 5 of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment and Validation Bill 2023. Madam Speaker, the amendments which are before this House this afternoon are very straightforward and simple. With respect to the proposed amendment introduced by Clause 3 of the bill, we ask that the words "in consultation with" be replaced by the words "with the agreement of the office," so that that clause will read, "such other services as the Minister may, on the recommendation of the office or upon the initiative of the Minister, with the agreement of the office, by order determine." We ask further, as amended in the Senate, that in subsection 7 to delete the words 5 and to substitute instead the words 6E. In clause 5 of the bill, we ask for an amendment in similar terms to that already proposed for clause 3, that is to say, in subsection A1, by deleting the words "in consultation with" and replacing with the words "with the agreement of," and to add a new clause subsection 4 to section 63, that is to say, regulations made under section 63(1)(c) shall provide for the contracts awarded to be reported to the office. As I said, Madam Speaker, the amendments are straightforward and simple, and I do not intend to trouble this House for any undue length of time. The short point is that very sensible amendments were proposed in the other place, have been accepted by this government, so that you will now have, with this House accepting the amendments on the table, you will now have the minister making an order under Section 7(6)(e) of the Procurement Act, doing so on the recommendation of the office or upon his initiative with the agreement of the office, and may by order determine. That allows for flexibility of the application of the new law, so that the minister may propose, but ultimately the discretion and oversight of the Office of Procurement Regulator will inform the acceptance or not of the proposed order. With reference to Clause 3B, a simple amendment, may it please you, Madam, and that is that with respect to Clause 7 of the bill, as is now, of the Act, as is now contained, instead of the reference in 7(7) to Clause 5, that clause will be deleted to make a specific reference to Clause 7(6)(e), which is the subsection of Section 6 of the Act that allows the minister to propose the order which is to allow for additional exemptions under Clause 7(6). And with respect to Clause 5A of the bill, again, we introduce and ask this House to accept the amendments which were proposed and accepted in the other place, and to delete the words "in consultation with" and to replace with the words "with the agreement of," meaning that the minister will propose, but ultimately the oversight will be that of the Office of Procurement Regulation. And lastly, Madam Speaker, we ask that a further section be added to Clause 63, so that at the end of the process, when the orders are made, we will introduce, by inserting after subsection 3 the following new subsection: regulations made under 63(1)(c) shall provide for the contracts awarded to be reported to the office, allowing for oversight and for the transparency which the Act proclaims at Section 5, the Objects Clause. And Madam Speaker, as I said at the beginning, I don't need to elaborate. We've already had comprehensive submissions and speeches on this amendment, and with those few words, I beg to move.
Honourable members, the question is that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to clauses 3A and 5 of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment and Validation Bill 2023. Member for Barataria Samuel.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity to contribute to this particular motion, which is part of our legislative exercise when we pass laws in this honorable House. And the last time we left on Wednesday, I didn't expect that we would be meeting so soon. But here we are with the third extraordinary sitting in probably less than a week. And Madam Speaker, the government would have taken this particular bill to the other place, and there would have been amendments to two particular clauses. Those are Clause 3 and Clause 5. And the crux of the amendment to Clause 3 deals with the minister's ability and his power to make an order to exempt various services. And at Clause 5, it deals with the minister's power to promulgate regulations. So I will deal with Clause 3 first, Madam Speaker. And when you look at these two particular amendments that are before us here, when the bill left here, it left here with the minister having a very great deal of power in order to make...
Just want to guide. Remember, this is a very narrow exercise. So while I'll give you a little leeway, this is not to rehash anything that took place, and it is really confined to the exact text of the amendment. So we can't deal with all of Clause 3, we can't deal with all of Clause 5. It's the exact amendments. Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And this deals with the curtailment of the power of the minister, because now the minister has to act according to the amendment with the agreement of the office. And a change from the minister only consulting with the office. So therefore, if the office had said yes or no, or even not responded, the minister could have made the exemption to that particular service. But now, the minister must do it with the agreement of the OPR. And Madam Speaker, I have flagged one particular concern with this amendment, with the minister being with the agreement of. Because the rationale of this is that there was too much bureaucracy. And now if you have to get the agreement of the Office of the Procurement Regulator, are we now adding a layer of bureaucracy onto this entire exercise? Because if the minister now have to seek the approval and agreement of the OPR, is the minister now having to add a layer of bureaucracy? And Madam Speaker, our view remains the same and consistent, that the minister should have just come to the Parliament and sought the approval right here. Because if the OPR says no to the minister and he does not agree, will it then grind government services to a halt? Because that's why we're here, to prevent the government from grinding to a halt. So why not just leave it to affirmative resolution? In fact, why you didn't just put it to affirmative resolution of the House? If it's cumbersome to go in both houses of Parliament, it should have just been the minister exempt the services with the affirmative resolution of the House. Just like how we would approve a commissioner of police right here in this particular chamber. So that's the first point, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, what is strange about this particular amendment is that this government now finds it easier to convince an independent institution to give them an exemption from procurement of a particular service. And this institution is no regular institution. This is the OPR that is set up by the particular Act of Parliament. He now has to get the agreement of who regulates that law, and now he's asking the OPR to say, well, can you agree with me to now not allow your office to have any oversight over my procurement? So the government finds it easier to convince an independent institution than come to the Parliament. And I find that may have some difficulty with us. Then, Madam Speaker, back onto the point, if the OPR disagrees. Let's just say minister sends the order to the OPR, OPR says no, but the minister wants this particular service exempted. What does the minister do? Madam Speaker, is it that we will now have a government having to apply to a court for judicial review action for the approval for a court to now supervise that particular process of the OPR? Because the minister wants this, you know. The OPR is saying no. What recourse does the minister have? The only recourse I can see, Madam Speaker, is that the OPR is a public body under the Judicial Review Act and can be susceptible to judicial review. So isn't that entire lengthy process now, if we have to go to court, will cause the government services to grind to a halt? What if a pipe breaks in that particular period? Will the government services grind to a halt? Will there be no toilet paper again in the ministry or any services to fix photocopiers? Because all of those things that they justify, Madam Speaker, will cause the government to grind to a halt. But now you're adding an extra layer of bureaucracy on this entire thing, when all we are saying is that just come to the Parliament, come in the full public glare of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and exempt what you have to exempt. Let the country see what you're doing. And I see no difficulty with this, Madam Speaker, because we sit almost on a weekly basis. On a weekly basis.
Already allowed you some leeway, so we're not going back to what you want. Okay, I understand the point that you're trying to make, the difficulties that may arise from this, but we're not going back. I think that was fully ventilated, as you yourself pointed out last week. Member for Naparima, I have ruled. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And when we were in the committee stage, I know my colleague from Naparima would have raised some of these concerns, Madam Speaker, for the mandatory consultation of the minister. Maybe if he was listened to, we could avoid this particular sit-in. But I want to move quickly on to Clause 5, Madam Speaker. And Clause 5 deals with amending the power of the minister to make regulations. And there are two amendments to Clause 5 on the bill. And that deals with the first one, dealing with the minister making the regulations, and that he has to now get the agreement of the Office of Procurement Regulator. So it would read, Madam Speaker, when you add this Senate amendment to what is existing, is that the minister may, on the recommendation of the office or upon the initiative of the minister, and this is the Senate amendment, with the agreement of the office, make regulations to give effect to the provisions of this act, including the regulations with respect to, and the list of regulations. So now the minister has to now get the approval of the Office of Procurement Regulator. And I know the constrictures of this debate, so I repeat and rely on the earlier points I would have raised with respect to the minister having to have the agreement of the office with respect to all of the issues. If the office disagrees, if the office agrees, all of those issues I have previously ventilated, I repeat and rely upon them now. With respect to the second amendment, Madam Speaker, which is found at Clause 5B in the motion that we're dealing with at Appendix, it now says at subsection 4, a new subsection 4 will be included to the original section 3 of the Parent Act. And this deals with regulations made under section 63(1)(c) shall provide for the contracts awarded to be reported to the office. Now, what does section 63(1)(c) means, Madam Speaker? That deals with the procedures for the procurement of goods and services up to the value of $1 million. So now what this new subsection is saying is that regulations will have to be made with respect to the government utilizing this facility now available to them to procure goods and services without being subject to the legislation for values up to $1 million. And it says that the regulations in which the minister shall promulgate shall provide for those contracts up to the value of $1 million to be reported to the office. Which office? The Office of Procurement Regulator. So what the concern here, Madam Speaker, is this, is that it's a very vague, very, very vague piece of drafting. And there are other legislation in which reports have to be made, and all of us may be very well familiar with those reports. For example, annual reports. But there's an additional layer of particulars in terms of it should say exactly what the report should contain. Because the minister could send a very bare-bone report to the office, but he remains compliant with the law, but it may not have the details in which should be there. There are no particulars in which the minister should do this. Also, there is no timeline. What if the government decides to exercise this power to award contracts up to a value of goods? As soon as this bill is passed tonight, and let's say by Friday they start exercising this power, will it be next 10 years that the minister will submit this report to the Office of Procurement Regulator? I understand that under the Interpretation Act, and I know the Attorney General may in fact raise this concern, that if a law does not provide a timeline, it means as soon as reasonably practicable. But all of those things are always subject to judicial scrutiny. And those are some of the concerns, Madam Speaker, that we wish to raise with respect to Clause 5. That, we understand that it would be with the agreement of the office. That may add an additional layer of scrutiny because the minister now has to get the approval for the regulations. We're not speaking about the exemptions of services. But when it comes to the regulations that he has to now make, which has to be reported to the office, I think it lacks that level of particulars that will provide for the encouragement of transparency, accountability, and value for money, which are the main aims and objectives of the parent law, the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act. So, Madam Speaker, with those few concerns, I would like to wind up my presentation, and I thank you for the opportunity. And while we are in the height of this campaign season, I wish my colleagues safe returns after the campaign period and have a very productive vacation period. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Attorney General.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. There's one word that I could use before I take my seat, Madam Speaker, and that word is sophistry. But to do justice to his honorable leader referred to him as the young man from Barataria, San Juan. I will spend just a little time to emphasize a few points.
Just 1 minute, we allowed it, but I have to remind everyone, something said outside when it's said in here is adopted by the speaker. Okay? While it might be flattering and banter, everybody in here is the honorable member.
So that, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So for that, in response to the comments made by the honorable member for Barataria, San Juan, he questions in relation to the amendments that have been proposed to clauses 3 and 5, the substitution of the words in agreement with in place of in consultation with. He questions the need for that at all. And I would remind the honorable member, and he would be well aware of this, that in our jurisprudence, there is a significant difference in the meaning of words, consultation as opposed to agreement. In fact, the word consultation began its development in the public law jurisprudence in remarks which were made to the High Court by Mr. Stephen Sedley, Queen's Counsel as he then was, went on to become Sedley LJ. And that has given rise to what are now known as the Sedley requirements. That is to say, the requirements for consultation require sufficient reasons for the proposal must be provided to allow intelligent consideration and response. Adequate time must be given for the response. The short point there being that consultation is something to be undertaken conscientiously and with due regard and adequate time for that which forms the subject of consultation. I make that point, Madam Speaker, to emphasize the balance with which this government approaches its constitutional mandate of governance. Because in the other place, the government could have insisted that the use of the term with, in consultation with, was more than satisfactory to achieve the purpose of allowing a role for the Office of Procurement Regulator. Instead, prompted by the legitimate concerns which were raised in the other place by the independent Senate bench, the government accepted in maintaining balance in government to relinquish its right to rely on the term consultation according to the common law jurisprudence, which would have meant a meaningful interchange between the office and the government, and has instead accepted that the minister's order made pursuant to section 7(6)(e) will be made, and when we go to 63(1), it is the same, will be made by the minister in agreement with the Office of Public Procurement. And what does that mean? It means that the government respects the role and function of the office, which is endowed with considerable powers, and I don't need to go into it in detail. It is set out in sections 13 and 14 of the Act, recognizing the legitimate oversight role of the Office of Procurement Regulator. And what is that in aid of? That is in aid of, if I may be permitted, with your leave, Madam Speaker, in aid of the objects of this Act. The objects being to promote A, the principles of accountability, integrity, transparency, and value for money. B, efficiency, fairness, equity, and public confidence. And C, importantly, local industry development, sustainable procurement, and sustainable development in public procurement and the disposal of public property. so that in the interest of encouraging and supporting the objects of the Act, the government has accepted on the recommendations of the independent Senate bench to allow the initiative of the minister exercised under the Act to have to be in agreement with the regulatory oversight of the Office of Public Procurement. I cannot, for the life of me, with the greatest of respect, imagine what could be wrong with that. And that is why I stood to say that, but for the respect that I have for the honorable member for Barataria San Juan, I would have said simply sophistry and taken my seat. Madam President, with respect to the further remarks in relation, Madam Speaker, I beg your pardon, with respect to the further remarks, with respect to that which was said by the honorable member in relation to the further amendments at clause 5, that is to say that the new regulation to be introduced, regulations made under section 63(1)(c), shall provide for the contracts awarded to be reported to the office. Well, that's about transparency. The point there being that contracts are going to be made under the amendment, which has already been accepted in both houses within that $1 million threshold, and those contracts, or all contracts, in relation to regulations made pursuant to section 63, will now simply be reported to the office to allow for the oversight and transparency that that office will bring to ensure that the Act is being complied with. Again, I can see nothing objectionable about that, nothing to protest against, and I end with your leave, Madam Speaker, on the word sophistry. Thank you very much. I beg to move.
Honourable members, the question is that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to clauses 3A and 5 of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment and Validation Bill 2023. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against?
Mrs. Robinson-Regis.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Mr. Hines.
Aye.
Mr. Dial Singh.
Yes.
Mr. Alwari.
Aye.
Ms. Beckles.
Yes.
Mrs. Webster Roy.
Aye.
Ms. Kojo.
Aye.
Dr. Gatsby Dolly.
Aye.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Yes.
Mr. McClatchy.
Yes.
Mr. Cummings.
Yes.
Mr. Ford.
Yes.
Mr. Denoberger.
Aye.
Mr. Leons.
Yes.
Mr. Manning.
Aye.
Mrs. Morris Julian.
Aye.
Mr. Scotland.
Aye.
Mr. Richards.
Yes.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Charles.
No.
Mr. Indar Singh. No. Mr. Hussain.
No.
Mr. Parry.
No.
Ms. Mohit.
No.
Mr. Tanku.
No.
Dr. Sitran.
No.
Madam Speaker, the result of the division is as follows: 19 members voting for, 8 members voting against, and there were no abstentions.
Honourable members on a division, with 19 members voting for, 8 members voting against, and no abstentions, the motion for the amendments are carried. Honorable members, you are reminded that this House stands adjourned to a date to be fixed.